Welcome to the Digital Second Future Mobility Talk. My name is Tobias Broskowski, and I am going to be moderating this dialogue today. My background is working as Key Account Manager for ITS Hamburg, and as most of you know, this year is a very special one for us, as we will be hosting the ITS World Congress in October. So today's topic suits very well with the Congress themes, as we will speak about urban road safety. That is a key priority, a key topic for ITS, of course. And we will speak about how to protect vulnerable road users in particular. And before we start, I would like to lay down some ground rules or some house rules so we make this event as smooth and interesting as possible for everyone. So first of all, if you have any questions to our participants, please ask them. It's very welcome, but only ask them to the panel that we have later on. During the keynotes, we don't have the possibility to ask questions because of the time. The time is pretty, we don't have too much time for that. So please ask the question directly in the chat if you are logged in via Zoom, or if you are logged in via YouTube, watching us via YouTube, please use the comment function below. And second of all, of course, please, everyone who is not speaking, make sure to mute yourself and turn the camera off. So I still see some cameras on. Please turn the camera off if you're not speaking. Thank you. Okay, and to start right off, I would like us to listen to some welcoming words of State Councillor and Plenipotentiary of the Free and Hanseatic City of Hamburg to the federal government, the EU, and Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Almut Möller.
Dear participants, contributors and organizers, dear Deputy Director General of the European Commission, Mr. Matthew Baldwin, dear Member of the European Parliament, Mr. Ismail Ertug, dear Senator of the Ministry for Transport and Mobility Transition, Dr. Agnes Tjax, dear CEO of Urtico ITS Europe, Mr. Jakob Bongskard, dear panelists, and of course, dear mobility enthusiasts, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Senate of the Free and Hanseatic City of Hamburg and the Hanse Office, the joint representation of Hamburg and the state of Schleswig-Holstein to the EU in Brussels, it is a pleasure for me to welcome you to the second Future Mobility Talk with a focus on urban road safety, protecting vulnerable road users. It is an honor for me to set the scene for today's event, to dive into the future of mobility and learn, discuss, and talk in the next 90 minutes or so how we use digitalization to get safe, climate neutrally and efficiently from A to B. At the beginning, I would like to express my heartfelt thanks to all of you who made this inspiring and insightful online event possible. Even though we would have really very much liked to host you in the Hanse office in Brussels, where we launched our series of talks in December 2019 with an event on Hamburg's ITS strategy, the ongoing pandemic situation forces us to discuss the digitalization of mobility today also digitally. But I know you're used to that format, and this makes us no less ambitious. So, even though we make enormous progress in all facets of digital solutions these days, the pandemic also still causes an unimaginable decrease in mobility. But we all know and feel how essential mobility as a key enabler for physical contacts is. We all have the need to meet our families, friends, and colleagues in person. Once we have overcome these challenging times, I'm pretty convinced that we will see a fruitful coexistence of on and offline situations where mobility is an important link between both worlds. Therefore, mobility will remain of utmost importance for connecting human beings besides digital services. Digital solutions in this context will pave us to make mobility safer and more sustainable. Urban mobility as such has become one of the most important indicators for the quality of life in cities. Although Hamburg has received good ratings in the current report of the European Union on the quality of life in European cities, which we're happy to receive, we don't rest on our efforts. It takes demands and challenges of the future very seriously, this report, and so do we. We want to make our city safer, smarter, and mobility more sustainable. In order to reach our ambitions, we, for example, invest massively in new bike lanes, more dedicated spaces for pedestrians, a new fully automated metro, and we are also host of this year's Intelligent Transport Systems World Congress. Today, we would like to focus with you on the weakest road users in our cities and talk about cyclists and pedestrians. In talking about this specific group, we talk about all citizens because at some point we all belong to this group, even if we are passionate car drivers. For instance, at some point we leave the car, cross the street, or go to a shop. So therefore, it's crucial to discuss digitalization as a catalyst for increasing the safety for vulnerable road users in our urban ecosystem. Before I'm very happy to hand over to Urtico and the other speakers, let me allow to wish you and to wish us all insightful discussions. And I would also cordially invite you all to visit the ITS Congress in Hamburg later this year in October. With a worldwide effort to fight against COVID-19, I'm quite optimistic to meet one or the other in person to experience the future of mobility in the city of Hamburg this year. Let us experience, let us shape the future of mobility in Europe now. Thank you.
Perfect. So this was the welcome word of Mrs. Almut Möller. And this invitation to the World Congress now directly leads us to our next speaker. He is the CEO of Urtico, which is not only the leading organization and think tank when it comes to intelligent transport systems in Europe, but also our partner to organize the ITS World Congress. So let's give our full attention now to Jacob Bangsgaard.
Thank you, Tobias, and warm welcome from my side as well to today's discussion. Friends and colleagues, all the best wishes for a 2021, which hopefully will be totally different than 2020. We are this year in Urtico turning 30, and we have been for the last 30 years been working on making the mobility sector safer, cleaner, and more efficient by using intelligent transport systems and services. Safety is therefore a part of our DNA. It's something which is extremely important to us. It's something that is so integrated in much of what we do. We started more than 20 years ago on developing e-safety, then it turned into i-mobility, and we have been also having some success stories like the e-call coming to market. It took us 17 years, but it is today mandatory in all new vehicles. It just shows how important it is when you're dealing with complicated deployments like the e-call system, that all stakeholders work together to secure the deployment, and especially when we are talking about the cooperation between private and public operators. What we will see in happening this year will be the defining of the new normal. We just heard how cities are giving space back to pedestrians, bicyclists, so vulnerable road users. And therefore, when we hopefully soon will open up our mobility system fully again in our cities, we will see changes having been made to the infrastructure, and therefore, and having more vulnerable road users in the traffic, and therefore we will take this opportunity to use technologies, to use our work on traffic management, to make sure that there is a close cooperation between the physical and the digital infrastructure, but also all the players that are operating on in the mobility system, so that we share the data, so that we cooperate in the best possible way to make the travel safe and convenient for everyone. Another area which is very close in our DNA is the networking. And we just heard about the ITS World Congress taking place in October this year in Hamburg. The networking and the showcasing of the developments that we do is something that is extremely important to our partnership. It's extremely important to the cooperation we have with the institutions, the European Commission and the European Parliament. And therefore, we are really much looking forward to moving out of the digital space and into the real world and meet up again very soon, hopefully. And I had a meeting yesterday with my two counterparts in the Asia Pacific region and Americas, and we discussed the whole program and the demonstrations, the exhibition, everything happening in Hamburg. And I can tell you that we have quite a spectacular event prepared for you. We are hoping for the opening up our society very soon to help all of us. And we hope that we will be able to have a full-scale real world event taking place in Hamburg in October. So I hope to see you very soon in real life, and definitely I'm hoping to see you in Hamburg in October. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jacob. I hope that you all will join, of course, in October. So I can only agree to that. And next on our digital stage, we are pleased to welcome Matthew Baldwin, a very special guest from the European Commission. Mr. Baldwin is Deputy Director General of DG Move, and I think it is a very good timing that we have him with us today, as the European Commission recently released, in December, if I remember correctly, they recently released their Smart Mobility Strategy and Action Plan. So I'm looking forward to your keynote on urban road safety. Mr. Baldwin, the digital stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Tobias. Greetings to Jakob. That is literally, ladies and gentlemen, the first time I've heard Jakob saying he wants to get out of the digital space. But I entirely agree with him in this context. I'm delighted to be with you, and very grateful that Hamburg, the free and Hanseatic city of Hamburg, and the Hansa office in particular, are taking up this vital issue of urban road safety and the protection of vulnerable road users in particular, ahead of the ITS World Congress. I think it's great that ITS focuses very squarely on the road safety questions. In my short presentation today, what I wanted to try to do is to focus on where we are a bit on road safety, on the safety of vulnerable road users more generally, and then to come in and look at the role that technological and digital dimensions can play, of course, including ITS. And let's first remember, by the way, we're talking in vulnerable road users of pedestrians, cyclists, and motorcyclists, everyone who's unprotected by the shell of a car. First slide, please. In fact, my second slide, please. Thank you very much. The first point I wanted to make, if we can go to this one, yes, thank you, is that road safety remains a very big global problem and a big European problem. We have a horrifying figure, 1.35 million deaths per annum, according to WHO estimates. Please note, that's the same order of magnitude as the total deaths over the last year from COVID. I think COVID is now a bit higher, but we have this number of global dead each and every year. And by the way, if we are able to tackle road deaths more systematically, it does not involve the catastrophic economic damage that we've seen from tackling COVID. And of course, I'm not criticizing governments who've done this necessary act, but if we can solve road safety, we actually will increase global economic prospects. So perhaps when the COVID crisis is over, we'll look around and we'll recognize road safety as the constant chronic pandemic, which really requires concerted global action along with action against climate change and so on. In the European Union, 23,000 deaths a year, or around 50 per million of the population, over 3,000 a year in Germany alone in 2018. That's the last year for which we have full data. A word on the COVID situation. We had fewer deaths in 2020, which is great news due to the COVID economic slowdown, but They only came down by about 10% in relation to the previous year, so less than proportionately in relation to the traffic loss. So although the EU is by some distance the most successful region for road safety globally, and although our road safety statistics are a long way from 1973, when we had more than 200 deaths per million of the population, we have a long way if we're going to a long way to go if we want to achieve Vision Zero, which is exactly why we've set a target for this decade to cut deaths and serious injuries in half by 50%. We need every member state to do the same. And in fact, I'd like cities to be more ambitious and to go for zero. And I'll say more about that in a moment. Next slide, please. If we then turn to the vulnerable road user deaths, this is a growing problem. Firstly, urban road safety is becoming more important because our society is becoming more urban. 75% in 2019, growing to 84% of us will be living in cities by 2050. And 73% of our citizens, according to Eurobarometer, think that road safety is a serious problem in cities. So as road safety increasingly, not exclusively, becomes more of an urban problem, and indeed, if you look at deaths on urban roads up by 6% in the last decade, we should examine who is dying in our towns and cities. And guess what? It is increasingly, as a percentage of the total deaths, it is our vulnerable road users. In the EU, of the 9,500 people who died on urban roads, fully 70% of those deaths are occurring to vulnerable road users. In some Swedish cities, the number is as high as 80%. It's obvious in a way when you think about it. We've made traveling in a car much, much safer. Cars are infinitely safer, and I'm proud because partly of what we've done in the European Union to deliver that. Infrastructure, which is, I'm afraid, still essentially designed just for car safety, is much better. And this is a major achievement, but it exposes just how much more vulnerable are road users outside the car, just at a time when cities like Hamburg, society in general, are looking to increase the amount of time people are spending walking and cycling. I won't spend time on why, because you know it's good for our health. It reduces the noise in our cities. It reduces the CO2 emissions. It reduces air pollution, which is why my friend Bronwyn Thornton of Walk 21 likes to describe vulnerable road users as valuable road users. This increased risk for vulnerable road users is mostly relative. In other words, in the EU from 2010 to 2018, we reduced the number of pedestrian deaths by 18% and motorcyclists by 16%, although let's note car occupant deaths down by 27%. In other words, we're generally increasing vulnerable road user safety, but not as quickly as for car passengers. This reflects increased exposure in our jargon, i.e. more people are walking and cycling, and this increases the risk. But it also reflects the danger of the interaction between vulnerable road users and motor vehicles. 83% of cyclist deaths, for example, follow a collision with a motor vehicle, for example. And it's fear of death or serious injury, which is putting off people from walking and cycling. And in some cases, that fear is not totally irrational. In some cases, the increased risk for vulnerable road users is absolute, not relative. The number of cyclists, for example, dying on EU roads has actually increased by 1%. And I'm afraid to say in Germany by 15% over the last decade. If you look at the United States, pedestrian deaths have increased by 50% over the last decade, which is a statistic I find truly horrifying, both in itself, but also because we have a tendency in the EU to follow American trends, and I'm afraid sometimes particularly the bad ones. So my next slide, please. If we then turn to look for solutions to this casualty problem for VRUs, it's not rocket science, is my headline. If we want to improve vulnerable road user safety, most of the solutions are at hand. Most of them are very cost effective, and they also go in the same direction as our desire to promote sustainable active mobility. And they follow the well-established lines of the principle of the safe system, Vision Zero, a holistic, layered approach to road safety. And some of these things are quite analog. in our jargon. First of all, we need to take account of vulnerable road user needs in our infrastructure planning. In our Infrastructure Safety Management Directive, it is now required to systematically take their needs into account. That might seem blindingly obvious, and by the way, the directive doesn't yet cover urban roads, but if you look at the roads where you live and where your children play, it's pretty clear that the safety of VRU is not the first and most obvious factor. So let's build proper pedestrian zones. Let's build new bike paths. We've seen in the COVID crisis just how much appetite there is for active mobility, but we have to make it safe to keep people coming back for more. Let's make those temporary lanes permanent. These measures are incredibly cost effective. Each euro invested in road safety infrastructure in Gothenburg delivered 48 euros in socioeconomic benefits. We have a 750 billion euro recovery and resilience facility, and that is money which we hope to see Hamburg making the case for sustainable mobility to the German federal authorities. The European Transport Safety Council estimate that 75% of the reduction in serious injuries in Gothenburg was due to these traffic calming segregation infrastructure measures. And by the way, let's connect active mobility up better to public transport. If people are taking buses and trains, that's another practical way to keep them safe. And lastly on this point, integrate road safety, please, in your sustainable urban mobility plans. We've now got a SUMP guide to urban road safety and active travel, which I thoroughly recommend. If we do everything we can to reduce climate emissions in cities, we will get the co-benefits. We will get the reduced noise, the reduced pollution, and the fewer deaths and serious injuries. And these are the really tangible benefits that citizens will appreciate. In short, cities can be the new road safety champions if they go above and beyond national or European regulatory requirements. We want to see 1,000 climate neutral cities in the EU by 2030. Let's also see 1,000 zero fatality cities in the EU by 2030, and let's see Hamburg as one of those. And by the way, when I'm talking about the SUMPs, we need much better data. So let's gather that data. Second obvious solution, when you can't segregate the infrastructure to keep your vulnerable road users safe, reduce the speed on your roads. If you look at the statistics, if you are hit by a car at 30 kilometers per hour, you have a 90% chance of survival. If you're hit by a car at 60 kilometers per hour, which I'm afraid is the de facto speed that cars are driving at in a 50 zone, you have a 10% chance of survival. This is the knowest of no-brainers. It's the quickest way, in fact, to cut mortality on our roads generally. A 1 kilometer reduction in average speed saves 2,000 lives a year just in the EU, which is why the Stockholm Declaration last year called for a generalized 30-kilometer speed limit in cities, and the UN is gearing up for a major campaign around this element. Third solution, let's start to make the vehicles safer for those outside the car as well as inside the car. Next slide, please. And I think this shows, coming now finally to technology, that there is a role for technology. We've already done quite a lot with passive technologies. We've regulated this through successive iterations of the EU's general safety regulation, most recently in 2019, enlarged head impact protection zones, direct vision requirements in trucks, which I know has been a big issue in Germany. But we're also now turning to these new active technologies, automated emergency braking with vulnerable road user detection systems, the famous intelligent speed assistance, which will help drivers maintain the speed limit. These are valuable new technologies, which even when we assess them with conservative techniques will produce considerable death and injury savings. Again, by 2024, all new cars sold in Europe will have to have these life-saving technologies on board. It should make a real difference. Next slide, please. And then finally, turning specifically to the digital aspects, in truth, I think we are excitingly really at the bottom of the curve in terms of the potential for these technologies for the safety of vulnerable road users. Jakob, you mentioned eCall as one example. Here's another, geofencing as a way of regulating the speed and safety of your cities. In Lyon, for example, there's a shared EU scooter operator has introduced a general speed limiter, which is based on GPS technology, where within the city's pedestrian zone, these scooters are automatically restricted to just 8 kilometers an hour, or barely above walking pace. If you're thinking about setting up a speed limited zone and you're worried about how to enforce it, why not geofence it? It works for scooters, it can work for other vehicles too. I know Hamburg is already doing a lot in terms of ITS strategy and projects, and so I won't take your time on that. But we do see an enormous capacity for CITS systems to be more and more useful. It started already at the end of 2019 for cars, for motorcycles, for heavy goods vehicles, and we expect to see it come on stream over the coming years. Over time, this will also benefit vulnerable road users. If you think of automated emergency braking with vulnerable road user detection, which I mentioned earlier, and you couple it with CITS, vehicles will not only be braking, but they'll be warning each other automatically of the dangers, including to other road users ahead. A lot, of course, remains to be done in terms of standardizing the equipment and defining reliable and effective use cases. But infrastructure-based radar and CITS systems will further increase over time the effectiveness of our systems, particularly when vehicles don't have a clear line of sight with the vulnerable road users. Of course, it's going to take a long time to equip large parts of our fleets, but that means, in fact, that there are no reasons to wait. And my last point, and I see I'm nearly out of my time, is for app-based systems, we might be able to move even faster. And just consider one example. I'm sure there are many. There's a new project called Talking Bikes, based in Deventer in the Netherlands. So the cyclists who download the app, they don't have to wait as long for the red light to turn green. They hear a bing on their phone at 100 meters from the light, and then a bing, bing, following a few seconds before the light turns green. If you think about how parents are increasingly organizing groups of school children cycling to school, these are called the cycling buses. So you get a group of kids together and a few adults and you ride in a bus formation. This sort of technology makes the trip a lot more operational and a lot safer because you can get all the kids through the green light before it turns red again. Just one small example. I'm sure there are thousands of others of what clever people are coming up with in terms of app-based applications to make our vulnerable road users safer. Again, we're at the bottom of the curve. The future, I think, is going to bring big new digital developments like CITS and small new developments like app-based tools, and we need to use them all. Let me stop there. Looking forward to the discussion later on. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baldwin, for these interesting insights. And I just checked our Zoom chat and saw that we have a first question. I will address that later, so I will take it with me and ask it to the panel that we have later, so that we move on now to our next keynote. And I would now like to hand over to a voice of our European Parliament. The Parliament is very active in the fields of climate action and digitization, and therefore I am happy to introduce one of their thought leaders on matters of transport, which is Ismail Ertug. He is a member of the European Parliament since 2009 already, and apart from being the co-chair of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, he is also a member of the Parliament's Committee on Transport and Tourism, and thus I am sure he can give us some valuable insights about the work that is done regarding urban road safety in the committee. Mr. Ertug.
So hello, good morning to all of you, and thank you very much for this invitation. I have listened very interestingly the slides of the Commission's representative, and I just want to go back with you in 2010. I was more or less a new elected MEP in the European Parliament. The European Commission at that time, they committed itself to the idea by 2020 to bring the death or the fatalities down to 50% in 2020. So, and when I'm looking now onto my sheet, and I can see the numbers not from 2020 because of Corona, we don't have that unfortunately, but the numbers from 2019 shows us, I guess that has been mentioned also by the Commission as well, but I have seen now some kind of stagnation since 2013. Astonishingly, we've seen from 2010 to 2013, we had a high decrease of numbers, 23.66% lower than 2010 until since then, to be honest. That shows me that the reducing of the numbers from 2010 to 2013 was successful. That should not mean that the policy from 2013 on is not successful, but we've seen it. The numbers they went down within the 3-4 years period, and since 2013 we have modest decrease, or I would say kind of stagnation. That brings us as the European Union to the position to talk about possible solutions. And I guess one of the biggest leverage what we have here is the digitalization, and the European Commission made some proposals on it, which important proposals, and even legislation. We've seen also that the high number of fatalities take place on urban areas. Yeah, the vulnerable road users are mainly in the urban areas, and this is a phenomenon, or not a phenomenon. We know that urbanization is going on, so the number in the cities are increasing, and in the meantime, in the rural areas, it's going to decrease. Therefore, this is now the way it goes. That does mean we have a leverage within the cities, within the urban areas. The more traffic, the higher the risk. I think this goes for itself. The individual traffic is also important. We have seen, okay, 2020 is a difficult year because of the pandemic, but before we've seen the traffic is going more and more, or increasing more and more in the urban areas. Not only the individual traffic, also the freight transport. And this is, I guess, to a certain extent, a phenomenon that we've seen the high increase of e-commerce, yeah, which is, I guess, our behavior in the meantime. We are used to buy via the internet and so on. But on the other hand side, we've seen it even within the pandemic that the people are buying more via the internet, and the e-commerce is increasing. Also, that does mean the traffic comes into the urban areas as well. I think the numbers have been mentioned already by the Commission representative, but I just want to reiterate that 40%, and this is what makes me sad, to be honest, 40% of fatalities are pedestrians, mainly, as I said, within the cities. 12% of them are cyclists, and these are the classical vulnerable road users, and 18% of them are the so-called two-wheelers, the motorcycles and so on. We've seen in Germany in particular that 70% of all fatalities is due to we call it turning accidents, yeah, the big trucks. And that does mean we have, and I know that the German government made some efforts towards this approach. They have given money, some support for the technical equipment for these kind of trucks, which is good. But I guess the high percentage could be taken down in the future when we support this kind of trucks with how can I say, the assistance, the turning assistance. A major priority should also be, when it comes to the digitalization, and which has shown us in the past that it works, is the automated and connected driving. In the previous term, before Corona, I was the one who founded and moderated the so-called Digital Future platform, where we have spoken mainly about this automatization, the digitalization of cars and mobility. And we've clearly seen that this had a positive effect on road safety, especially, as I said, in urban areas. However, we have to take care on the increase in traffic as such. We see that more accidents happen because of this. and digitalization can play here a crucial role as well. And some possibilities has been given by the Commission representative already. The automated emergency braking systems, the different sensor technology, the intelligent speed technologies, geofencing and or CITS. So what I want to say is that the European Union already made some efforts and legislation towards this approach. And I would like to conclude in the end. Now we have the situation because of the pandemic that the people don't want to use the public transport, which has brought down, I guess, a little bit the numbers down. But we've seen now in the meantime that the individual traffic has almost returned to the normal levels, while the public transport is still tumbling. And our approach should also be, when we look to the Paris Agreement, how to decarbonize the traffic and the mobility, we have to defend and support the public transport as the backbone of our decarbonization strategy for the future. More autonomous vehicles are needed. When it comes to buses, also the connection between the old-fashioned mobility, let me say it like this, together with the automated taxi services, for example. We have the different applications also have been set, so I don't want to reinvent the wheel once again. But the main leverage from now on, I guess, is the digitalization. As I said in the beginning, when we look to the figures, we've seen from 2010 to 2013, the measures they worked, and we brought the fatalities down. But since then, we have a stagnation that shows us we have to come up with more technology and digitalization on this way. And there are more investment needed finally towards to this companies, startups also who make some, who made and are going to make some more proposals regarding this. Yeah, and this is the way what we should do, what we will do as the European Union in general. Thank you, first of all, for this invitation, and my best wishes to beautiful Hamburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ertug. And now, coming from the European perspective, so we have heard of the Commission, we have heard from the Parliament, we move now to Hamburg in our short series of keynotes, and I would like to welcome our Senator of Transport and Mobility Transition here, Dr. Agnes Tjarks. And yes, you have heard right, mobility transition is already part of the name of the ministry. And I think Senator Tjarks will now give us some more information why this is not just a word for us here in Hamburg, but part of an agenda, and what this has to do with vulnerable road user protection.
Yeah, thank you, Tobias. Dear Mr. Ertug, dear Mr. Baldwin, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome again from Hamburg. As Tobias already mentioned, our ministry is already called Ministry for Mobility Transition because we have a clear agenda, the agenda of mobility transition, and we are very happy about the ambition Europe and the Commission, the Parliament developed in recent times of decarbonization, the cities, the traffic in the cities. We are very happy about and also excited about the outlining of the programs. And Mr. Baldwin, as you added today, the reduction of or the zero emission, the ambition of zero emission and Vision Zero is also a good connections we want to follow. And the figures, Mr. Ertug, and also you outlined in your keynotes for Europe is more or less also other figures that we see in Hamburg as a nutshell. But maybe I can first of all, in some short words, introduce our agenda. In Hamburg or in Germany, you all know we are used to be a car-oriented country, and we still are a car-oriented country, but we want to change this, at least in Hamburg at the moment and now. And we have a modal share of about 64% of eco-friendly mobility at the moment. And despite of what Mr. Ertug said, it's not only the public transport that is down at the COVID crisis at the moment, but also individual road using is down at 24% at the moment. But before COVID, we had this share of 64% eco-friendly mobility, and we want to raise it by 2030 to 80%. So we have to go 16% in 9 years, and that's quite an ambitious agenda. And we hope to have lots of support from the European level at this, because as you might know, the national level also supports us sometimes, but not all the times with these agenda. And to put it out, the big winner of mobility transition during COVID is the cycling branch. We are up to 33% cyclists in the past year, and we are also up to 63% building new, let's say, real traffic ways for cyclists. So we have an agenda of building 60 to 80 kilometers per year, and we are reaching these goals. So this are not only plans, but also goals that we reach at the moment. And within the ambition to reduce fatalities in transport, we'll see what you said, Mr. Baldwin, on the European level. We see it in Germany as well as in Hamburg in a nutshell. 30 years ago, we're having alone in Western Germany about 20,000 deaths in road using. Those are down to 3,000. So there's a big decrease. In Hamburg, the decrease was from about 120 deaths in 1990 to 25 to 30 deaths at the moment per year. However, we also see what Mr. Ertug said, a stagnation in the figures, and we're not going down much further. And what we also have to notice is that the death went down in the last 30 years by a lot, but not the severe injuries. They are only down by 20%, because many people that don't die are now severely injured. And this is also still a big problem. So Vision Zero is not only about, in our view, about about reducing death, but also reducing severe injuries. What can we do about this? The main part, obviously, for vulnerable road users is in the changing the system of driving, so to speak. As you mentioned it, we all know that the reasons for these accidents and these deaths are increased speed. So you mentioned about the speed of 30, the thing about red lights and not or misusing red light, and also the problem of turning at crossings. Those are the main reasons for severe injuries in Hamburg. And for those reasons, first of all, we're trying to rethink our infrastructure. We're going more the way of separated infrastructure for cyclists at roads, but also at crossings. We're trying to reduce the speed limit. However, the national law in Germany makes this pretty complicated and actually tries to prevent reducing the speed at 30. And so Germany has some way to go, but in the town, we're trying to do what we can do on the effort to reduce speed, to reduce injuries, casualties, and also to match all the other goals within this area, like decarbonization, but also a more livably and friendly city. You all know that we're having on our agenda as a town the ITS World Congress for the Intelligent Transport Systems. We are hosting it mainly for Germany. And within these Congress, we're also developing digital solutions for cyclists. For example, we're trying to develop a traffic light assistance for cyclists, so you can have at your cell phone, you can have your cell phone at the traffic while riding, and the cell phone tells you how fast you have to go and how far it is to reach the next traffic light by green. We're having driver's assistance system. So studies show in Germany that about 40 deaths in traffic could have been saved if trucks in Germany would have a driver's assistance system by turning at the red light. And since this is not introduced by the national government, now we're doing it with the trucks of the city. And we're also doing it with all the trucks of the cities, and we're also introducing it to the buses operated by the cities, which is about 2,000 buses. And so therefore we hope to increase cycling safety. We'll also have a project that's not only a traffic light forecast for cyclists, but in the end of the day, we'll also have the main green light for cycling and a permanent red light for cars, and it can only be changed if a car is approaching to the traffic light. So we're having a lot of digital solutions, but I think in the main line, we need to reduce the modal split of cars. We need to reduce traffic, as Mr. Ertug pointed out, and we need to reduce the speed in our towns. And with all these, we are on our way, but we need more support, especially in regulation. For example, it is actually not really clear why cars in Europe are allowed to drive faster than 30 kilometers per hour in a zone where you're only allowed to drive 30 kilometers per hour. There is actually no reason why this should be allowed at all. And if you have if you pointed out the geofencing and the digital systems, if you can reduce speed for in pedestrian zones, I think it was in Bordeaux, for the rollers, then you can also do it for cars, and this would help us a lot if these systems would be implemented in cars, and it would reduce carbon emission, and as well as would reduce casualties in traffic by a lot. So there's lots of things we can do together on this agenda. And I'm very happy that the European Commission and also the Parliament pointed out that the urban areas are the key to reduce carbon emission and the key to reduce casualties in traffic. And we are very happy to work with you together on this agenda. It is ambitious, but it will help the world make better. And as you pointed out, Mr. Baldwin, we do not want to follow the American way in this case. We want to develop a European way, and we want to keep on world leading in this question, and the European cities are on your side. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Senator Tjerks, for this perspective from Hamburg. I think we've already heard a lot of very interesting things. We have heard some solutions already, but now let's move to the last point of today's agenda, our panel discussion, where we can maybe speak about these things in a little bit more detail. I've also seen, and this is really great, a lot of questions coming from the audience. I will try to integrate them later on, but I think those are very great questions as well. So starting with the panel. Joining me in the panel, we have Dr. Tina Wagner, who is head of the Division for Transport Development in the Hamburg Ministry of Transport, Mobility and Mobility Transition. So ITS, I know for sure, is one of her core topics. And joining me as well, we have Dr. Matthias Feistel. He is the CEO of Luis Technology. Luis Technology is a Hamburg-based company that produces cameras and driver assistance systems, and is involved in retrofitting projects, we have heard of that a little bit already, of Hamburg's city-owned fleets. And the third participant in this round will be Matthew Baldwin. We've already heard his keynote. And to start off, I would like to ask you a question, Mr. Baldwin. Maybe again from a European view on the topic. I followed a tweet of you from last May, so May 2020, where you stated that Hamburg probably has still a lot of potential, so to say, because you wrote in the tweet, quote, Hamburg must turn to the elephant in the room, which is taking space from automobiles for an expanding network of bike lanes. So how do you think this topic evolved in Hamburg, but maybe also in other European cities since then? And do you think the situation improved when it comes to giving more space to cyclists?
Well, that's a good lesson in life, isn't it? That one should check one's Twitter feed before one comes onto one of these conferences. I meant it in good spirit, and I was very encouraged to hear just what Senator Tjerks was saying about how much is going on. Yeah, I mean, last year was a pivotal year for Hamburg, and I think and a lot of cities in terms of how we use the space in our cities. And COVID really brought that home. Just for example, pedestrians waiting in line to go into shops often didn't have the room on our narrow old pavements in Europe to do proper, safe social distancing. And so what we saw, including in Brussels, and I'm sure in Hamburg too, is, okay, well, let's take a lane of the road away so that people can wait in line safely. Everywhere you saw people looking at each other and trying to figure out, okay, what's a safe space? And then it's a small step from that to looking at the road in which you live or the road in which your children play. And you see just how much space is given up for the use of private cars, mostly for parking, by the way, for cars which are used a tiny fraction of their time. So, I mean, out of this terrible COVID crisis, maybe that's another thing, apart from looking relatively at the number of people who die on the roads, but to look at the way we use our space in cities. And I'm very, very encouraged to hear from Senator Sharks the great ambitions for cycling, and also my friend Ismail Ertug was absolutely right to talk about the importance of public transport. People have run away from public transport because they feel it's not safe. And I think there's been some misunderstanding of messages. I think most public authorities were saying, please keep public transport free for essential workers, like the medical teams trying to get back and forth to the hospitals. They weren't saying, don't go into buses because they're not safe. And I know there's been huge efforts by the public transport authorities across Europe to make them safe again. But it's really very simple. When we look outside, I see the traffic is back in Brussels, although we're still in lockdown here. It is nothing like the lockdown of the spring. And we must choose as cities and societies whether we want to have cities which are based on active mobility and public transport or are heavily based on car transport. I know what I'm choosing, because fundamentally, as we leave lockdown, do we just want to go back to gridlock?
Right, thank you. And to bring in Mrs. Wagner, maybe, how do you see the situation now from more of a Hamburg perspective? What changed in the recent year? What impact did it have? And also, from your point of view, maybe, what is the arsenal or what are the approaches we have actually at hand to protect vulnerable road users here?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Tobias, and a welcome from me as well. Yeah, what is the approach? I would say it is several approaches really, and we talked about a lot of them already. So first of all, I think the road design is just one really, really important factor when it comes to safety for pedestrians and cyclists, but also, of course, for car drivers. And I would say Hamburg is constantly working on the expansion of the infrastructure for cyclists, especially. Mr. Tjax already mentioned the numbers in 2020. 62 kilometers of new bicycle lanes were implemented, and we will continue with the same intensity in 2021. And we also observed a significant increase in the number of cyclists last year. So I think the signs are very well. We also implemented traffic calming in the central business area. For example, our Jungfernstieg, which is translated basically the Virgin Path or something. It was made car-free in autumn and will be further transformed during the next years. We also allowed the speed at the Jungfernstieg to 30 kilometers per hour. So you can see a lot of change happening in the central business district, where we want to improve quality of life, but also improve for people improve the ability and the possibilities for people walking and cycling. So we also have another project from March on for car lane road in the central business district, called Steinstraße, will be changed into a road with 2 bus lanes, cycle lanes, and remaining just a single one-way car lane. Both measures, the Jungfernstieg and also the Steinstraße, will significantly reduce through traffic in the central business district. And also, after maybe a bit slow start last year because of ongoing coalition negotiations after the election in February 2020, we also started implementing pop-up bike lanes in autumn, and more will follow. What Mr. Baldwin also talked about was using space for pedestrians and so on in the pandemic situation now. And we do have an example here that we reuse or transform parking spaces to expand outside sitting areas for restaurants, for example. We did that a lot and very successful. Well, these measures, relocating space from cars to pedestrians, cyclists, and public transport as well, aim at making travel safer, faster, and more comfortable and pleasure. However, we often see that car drivers, but also cyclists and pedestrians do not comply with rules like speed limits or access restrictions. And Mr. Baldwin also reminded us that the numbers of accidents and deaths were still very high. Up to 85% of these accidents result from human failure, like high speed and distraction and so on. So my vision would also be, like it was mentioned before, that in the future and already now, vehicles with sophisticated driving assistance and self-driving vehicles should, as a matter of course, comply to the traffic rules, meaning speed limits, access restrictions, parking rules, zones, and so on. And this hopefully will improve safety. A second focus is on cyclists and pedestrians when crossing a road. There are two aspects that need to be considered when planning an intersection, for example, that are safety and comfort, also including time. You don't want to wait too long if you stand at the red light. And we have several measures here. And some of them are ITS applications, and we here follow different approaches of cooperative, intelligent protection of the cyclists, pedestrians, and motorcyclists. And they are basically all based on sharing real-time data on vehicles, cyclists, and pedestrians with each other. And we test in different projects, different approaches together with private partners. Also, and we, for example, use precise location information from vehicles or smartphones, or precise detection of vehicles and persons. And we also test different options of communicating and sharing this data. Also, for example, in information on green light times and so on. And this was already mentioned, the turning assistance systems we implemented, for example, in the fleet of the public waste disposal services, and also the transport companies are now starting to retrofit their buses with these turning assistants. And maybe two last short things, because these issues all also were mentioned by Mr. Baldwin. From last year on, we collect data on cyclists 24/7 at over 70 counting points. So our data on cyclists improved a lot last year, and we are very interested to see how we can work with these data in future. And also, we had this discussion with the e-scooter companies, and they now, not now, but since several months already, they use geofencing to implement no parking zones that were defined by us as a city.
Yeah. Okay. Very interesting. I think I've heard a lot now also from several panelists or from several speakers about the role of trucks or general heavy vehicles in urban areas, and also the importance of turning assistance systems. And this is why I would like to bring in Dr. Feistel. From an industry perspective, Mr. Feistel, how do you see your role in achieving the ambitious goals of which we just heard? And where do you see the biggest challenges, also maybe from a technological viewpoint, to protect vulnerable road users?
Thanks very much. Hello to everyone, and thanks for having me on the panel. We are talking about the element you just mentioned and the keynote speakers mentioned, the right turn assistant, also known as a blind spot information system, BSIS. I think the city of Hamburg made a great progress in the last years. And we as Louis, we are happy to be part of it. And we are helping with two things, with the technology. Over 500 turn assistants have been equipped at the waste disposal service, as Mrs. Wagner just mentioned, at the firefighters and the police, and more to come, as Senator Tjax mentioned. And we not just helped with the technology, but also with helping hands, because our service technicians mounted those systems, and that gave the city the possibility to speed up the project and be faster than expected. And now more and more cities are jumping on board, are emulating Hamburg, and also putting this important topic, security topic, on the agenda, which we see around Germany and around Europe. More and more cities are interested. But I have one concern. We can help with technology, we can help with helping hands, but the equipment rate of the trucks, I estimate at around 5 to 10%. And this life-saving features equipment rate is even lower in other countries. So Germany is an even higher number, but 5 to 10% is low. It could only be the starting point if we really want to get to the vision zero, having no fatalities on the road. And that's our goal. And if we turn it around, 90 to 95% of trucks are driving around without BSIS technology. And yes, you could say, and we see a good development, that new vehicles from 2022 and 2024 onwards need to be equipped with this turn assistance systems. But it will take around 8 years in Germany, and across Europe, 11 years. So that's roughly a decade until all trucks on the road will be equipped. So what I would ask for is why is there no obligation for retrofitting? And I could imagine that mandatory retrofitting for all trucks could have an enormous effect on the Vision Zero goal and on the number seriously injured or killed. And we just learned from Mr. Baldwin that 23,000 deaths in the EU and 3,000 in Germany, and that the number of cyclist deaths are even going up. So one trigger that I would put into the discussion is that it would be nice to think about the retrofitting aspect and not just look at the new fleets, which is good, but it takes a decade until all trucks will be equipped.
This is a very good question. I think Matthew Baldwin, maybe you can answer to that. How can we speed up the retrofitting? How can we? Is this a question of regulation? Is this a question of different incentives for the companies?
Well, it's potentially both. It's a great question. Thanks, Matthias, for your comments. We've had a lot of discussions with the German federal authorities who've been pushing this very hard, including in the high-level group on road safety in the European Union, where they have, with our full support, several times pushed for support for two things. Firstly, they've been a small correction, and perhaps I wasn't clear enough in my own remarks, that the mandatory fitting of these most advanced turning assistance systems for trucks is actually only in 2026 in all trucks. So it's even further off than for most of the new active systems that we are proposing in the general safety regulation. And you're right, Matthias. I mean, that does mean a relatively slow rate over time. And so the question then becomes, should we adjust the regulation at the European level to require mandatory retrofitting? And this is what the German ask is about. And to be very frank with you, we put it into the member states and there's not a lot of support for it. And I'm afraid it comes to the cost question, which is considerable. And thus far, there's been relatively little interest. So as the European Union, we can make proposals, but if they're not going to be picked up and supported by member states, we won't get very far. So that's the first thing. So then the second question is whether we can do it on a voluntary basis by developing the kind of funds as Germany is doing itself to have that happen. And I'm very keen to encourage that as well. That might be a sort of fallback option. And the issue, of course, is you're going to want to spend money, if you're Germany, to retrofit your own trucks. But at the same time, in our single market, if the trucks are coming from across Europe, you might have an interest in finding some funds to retrofit all trucks. I'm not sure how that will play politically, but you see the argument. It's a very interesting and difficult one. We have a lot of sympathy, and we welcome the leadership that Germany has shown on this issue, and we'd like to see how we can help.
Okay. Before I take some of the questions from the audience, one last thing that is on my mind. I would like to go a bit further into the topic of the data usage, of the data that is generated by sensor systems such as that of Luis. Maybe this one goes best to Tina Wagner. Where do you see challenges in using the data generated by the sensor providers such as Luis, or also by infrastructure? And maybe you can give us some insight to what extent the public sector right now can already make use of the data.
Yes, Tobias, I will do that. Well, first of all, I think the problem of the sensor data is can we really trust him then in the data, and who is actually responsible for the validity of the data at what stage? For example, let's take signal data. Yeah. The information about green and red time phases, we'll give them via some communication unit to other users. At what stage we as a public sector are responsible for the validity of this data, and at what stage basically the taking the data company or whatever is responsible. This is a very tricky question. So I think this is really an issue to be solved. And we, for example, do that within projects with like HEAT, our electric shuttle in the Hafen City, the autonomous shuttle, which we can all see behind Tobias. We basically regulate that within the framework of the project, but we definitely need regulation here. What we do as a city is really to share data we have. For example, the data I mentioned we collect on cycling that is shared via our urban data platform. And we also have different projects using the traffic light data to be shared to different companies and users.
Okay, thank you. So that brings me to the audience. I would like to take a question from there. A question that I like a lot actually is from Jörg Becker, who is part of the Good Turn. And his question is, looking on behavioral change as crucial issue to make mobility transition happen, are there any deeper insights if people are prevented, or how people are prevented from moving by bike because of safety concerns? Do we have any analysis about that? Then Mr. Baldwin, please. Yeah.
Well, it's a fascinating question, and thank you, Jörg, for it. But maybe just to say a word also relating to this whole notion of the human factor, which I think is linked to the Mrs. Wagner made the same remark. It might sound a little intellectual or maybe a little controversial, but I think it's an important point. We shouldn't put too many chips in terms of our fight on road safety on getting behavior change. One of the most oft-quoted statistics, and Tina, you just mentioned it, is this 90% of crashes are caused by human error. It's one of my least favorite statistics, if I'm very honest, because we all make mistakes, right? I drop my keys 3 times a day, but it doesn't kill me. Only in a road setting does a mistake have fatal or serious injury consequences. And that brings us to the safe system. It's not the human and the mistake that's the problem. It's not the stupid child that steps off the curve because the child didn't listen to its education in school and was killed by the truck. It is our societal, political failure to make the road safe, which is the problem. We need systems that work for children that step off the road, step into the road. Frankly, even more controversial, we need a system which works for a very stupid drunk person who walks into the road as well. I mean, again, I know it's controversial, but we need to make our road safe. That is the only ultimate way we will drive things down, because humans are humans. Behavior change through speed, again, is very close to my heart, but I think we will only ultimately achieve it when we have strong enforcement, where we use the technology to really drive it down, and we are able thereby to, I think, make a big and a quick contribution to this particular aspect. I'm also often asked, can't we then accelerate the use of technology to take the human factor out? And I think over time that may happen. You may see more and more automated shuttles like the one behind you, Tobias, which will come into play, and the human will just not be playing a role. But again, a bit like the point on turning assistance in trucks, it will take time. It will be a long time before we have the ubiquity of these systems, particularly fully automated cars. You're talking really 30 or 40 years. And in the meantime, that's a lot of deaths and a lot of destruction. We can use the systems to make ourselves better in a piecemeal way along the way. But again, I come back to not ignoring obvious solutions that stare us in the face, what I call analog solutions to make people safer, to work in complementary ways with the new technologies. So I'm sorry, that was a long way not to answer your question. But the particular research about, the idea that you stop cyclists going around to make them safer, I think is really a cul-de-sac in road safety thinking. Somebody else quoted, I think Mr. Bunter, that the single crashes of cyclists amount to 60% of the total. That's true, but the crashes of cyclists are not the problem per se. It's the deaths and the serious injuries that result that are the problem. I've fallen off my bike 10 times in the last 2 years, and I'm still here to tell the tale. It's the 83% of death to cyclists which involve collisions with motor vehicles that are the problem. Those are the ones we've got to take away, which is why all the efforts that are being made in Hamburg to create segregation, all the efforts to reduce speeds to make those crashes less serious, those are the vital things we need to address, rather than preventing cyclists from going around or pedestrians from walking in the cities. Sorry to be a bit long. Thanks.
No worries. Totally clear and understood. Go for the obvious solutions right now. Go for the cheap solutions right now, and technology will evolve in the meantime. But a good question that actually relates directly to that, and I would like to take that from the audience, is from Silke Conrad. She states, or it's more of a statement, but it actually makes sense. If we want to further reduce road fatalities, we need a lot more research, not only on the number of accidents, but also the exact reason and circumstances. Only then we can actually find the right solution. So I would like to take this and maybe ask Mr. Feistel, to what extent do we have knowledge why, when, how accidents happen?
It's a really good question, and we are at the beginning, to my mind. But we have technology and we have data that helps us bringing the puzzle together. And one of the puzzle pieces is what we called our Louis Prevent system. We collect information on the turn assistance systems and the triggers and the GPS data, and send it to a central database. And in this database, the near misses are shown on a heat map. And the city can then take infrastructural measures and work on this crossroad, or CITS warnings could be implemented, or speed limits and so on. And then what Tina Wagner mentioned, can we trust the data? Who's responsible for the validity? That's a totally valid point. And not all this data is valid and good, because we have false alarms and so on. but there are next steps to make this data better from version to version. So we will integrate brake data, for example. When the truck driver brakes, it's an even more meaningful data point for this heat map. And in the future, we will integrate artificial intelligence on that, and that gets back to the question of research that will give us the information on the actual traffic situation. So the artificial intelligence could gain more information. Was the traffic light green at the event? Was the traffic signs posted? Was there a separate cycle lane, and so on? And we can come up with more, better, valid data and more meaningful measures that what we could take.
Okay, thanks. One more question. Mr. Baldwin, please, if you directly want to react, please.
I'm sorry, I just want to say something quickly on this. I know I'm talking too much and I do apologize. Very interesting to hear what Matthias said about technology, and there is clearly a lot of data that can fly into the hands of researchers and governments in terms of preventing death and serious injuries. But I really would underline that's what we should be focusing on, not the number of crashes per se, but the deaths and serious injuries. And here I again want to applaud Germany, which has a very good in-depth research facility looking at how people die in crashes. And I would love to have a similar thing working at the European level, so we could really drill down, and again, using the safe system approach, what were the different elements of failure? Was it the car? Was it the speed? Was it the infrastructure? And what was it? And then with that, we can make the adjustments, including, as Matthias said, we should be very wary about, let's try to reduce the number of crashes, because that actually in some instances can drive up your number of fatalities. If, for example, you put in a traffic light to reduce the number of crashes, but people go through that traffic light, then you're more likely to have a fatal crash than if you have a roundabout, which has a lot more bumps and minor crashes, but fewer fatalities. It's focusing on those key safe system objectives is the key for me. Thank you.
Right, thanks. Another question from the audience that is tech related in a way, but maybe not so tech related if you look at it closer, is the one from Frank we just received. And I think this is very interesting as well. He states that most of the vulnerable road user discussion protection is around the passive participant of the vulnerable road user. But looking at new technologies, I mean, 5G is now in the rollout, and well, everyone has a smartphone, nearly everyone at least. Can't we make these passive participants, can't we switch them to active participants by detecting them, for example, via the 5G technology? So what's your opinion? Anyone wants to take that?
Oh, yes, I can if you like. Sure. I think it's an important issue, and we do, I think, implement it or consider it in our projects already. When we, for example, think about that if a cyclist or pedestrian appears at a signal, how it can turn green faster. If you mean it this way, I would say yes. Of course, it's important to take cyclists and pedestrians as the active part. I also, if I may, would like to comment on the other discussion themes before. I think the point that Mr. Baldwin mentioned with the accident research is a very important point. And we do a lot here, and we do have a, I think, decent accident reporting, where we also bring in the reporting into a commission that then assesses the intersections with many accidents, and then we think about how we can redesign these intersections. But I'm sure that more data will help us to have a clearer picture of where actually near misses, for example, happen a lot, and where we have to change something also at the infrastructure or to implement better techniques. But I also we also could consider maybe more and more crowdfunding solutions now, where we collect the opinions of people on safety or the feeling on safety or unsafety. We have a lot of participant tools over the World Wide Web or apps or whatever, and we can, I think, getting better in using all these data and felt safety or unsafety opinions of the people.
Thank you. Mr. Feistel, your hand is also up.
Yes, thanks. One comment on the passive participants becoming active. I like all these ideas around CITS and apps, and we are involved in that as well. And it's the only way and a good way forward. But there are some old-fashioned ways that lead to good results as well. When we, for example, look into the UK, in the UK, trucks are permitted to emit a sound into the public space when driving forward or turning. You might have heard, warning, this vehicle is turning left. We could easily fit the trucks with these cheap sound modules to help the cyclist perceive trucks better in the public space, but it's not allowed, at least here in Germany. And the same applies to visual sign projections on the cycle paths. So both the sound being emitted into public space and the projections on the cycling space are very, very cheap, old-fashioned technologies that could activate passive road participants.
That's an interesting point. Actually, is that a question, well, again, of standards regulation? Can we...
I believe so, yes. Maybe Mr. Baldwin knows more around this topic, but yeah. I would be really interested because it's so easy and so good in the UK.
Well, I'd love to learn more about it, Matthias, and perhaps we could be in touch bilaterally and you can send me some info about that. Again, as I said in my remarks, I think we're really at the bottom of the curve. And again, the big solutions, the big CITS, the connections, but also the small ones, the app-based things, as indeed Jürgen has raised in his question. I have to say, again, I think I'm the controversialist on this panel. I mean, one great piece of technology would be a thing which switched these phones off when we are moving, particularly for motorized users. I mean, you still see way too much use of them, and the distraction that flows, particularly in the city context, is potentially lethal. And I would love to see technology companies come up for ways which meant that you just can't drive your car while using a phone. I hear the same said by the way of people who are cycling or indeed walking, but I have to also say that the consequences for them and for other road users tend to be a little less catastrophic. But that will be another contribution to the debate that technology could bring to shut the technology down from time to time. Thank you.
That's a very interesting point as well. I'm afraid we're running a little bit out of time. So maybe to finish this up from all three of you, what is your main takeaway from today's discussion and where do you see your particular role in increasing? So what can you do in the near future to increase urban road safety? Maybe starting with Mr. Feistel again.
Yes, so our main role could only be on the technology side, but I think it's a big weight we can bring on the table. And it will, we learned earlier that we have steep learning curves, and we always had in the past and will have steep learning curves, and we will never be satisfied. And the next step will be artificial intelligence that comes into our systems, embedded on board of the trucks in a good data protective way that nobody has to fear about. And that will increase comfort and safety. So meaning fewer false alarms, better detection of hazards, more comfort for the driver. And I would love to see more support from the EU and from Germany and Hamburg around supporting AI, that we have a relevant position in international competition. And another thing we will be part of is process digitalization. We have a very nice project at the moment around pupils and disabled people, that they get better transportation, more reliable transportation, that the parents and social agencies get better information if the pupils arrived at the school and so on, and we get leaner processes for public administration. So it's there's a lot around artificial intelligence and digitalization that we would love to play a role.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Wagner, where do you see your role?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think first of all, really, the highest importance really is a good road design. And also the question of speed is very important. I agree here with Mr. Baldwin. But then if it goes down to the intersections and crossings and turnings, ITS and CITS applications can support safety. There are different technical options to detect users by the vehicle, by roadside infrastructure, by devices. And we should assess these options taking into account their possible impact, but also the economic feasibility. We didn't talk a lot about that today, but I think it's an important point to discuss and to solve as well. And we have to work on the regulatory frameworks for data detection, data sharing, interoperability, and so on. Here, I think cooperation of public and private sector is necessary and of high value, as we do it within a lot of our ITS projects. And also, I again want to just highlight this point that vehicles with sophisticated driving assistance and self-driving vehicles should, of course, comply to the traffic rules, and they shouldn't be able to drive more than the actual speed limit, also to access for example roads they actually shouldn't access, and also or to park on areas they shouldn't park on, and so on. So and of course data should be shared as far as possible, particularly as we said before, the data on near misses and so on, so that we can draw conclusions for road planning and safety planning. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Mr. Baldwin.
Well, I'm hugely encouraged by this discussion. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you very much for inviting me. I'm hugely encouraged about Hamburg, and again, one should also always be careful of what you tweet in May, because you may be invited to join a panel following January. And I think there has been, let me be honest, I think there has been criticism in the past about how much Hamburg was doing. And I think I'm also hearing that you turned the corner and you're going great guns. So thank you for that, and please keep it up. I've also heard lots of practical and technologically interesting ideas today and how we can bring data and digitalization in. And I'm probably too old and too analog and too unimaginative. And I think this has been a spur to my thinking in these areas to look at ways we can do more. Specifically on my role, Tobias, I think I'm trying to unify these two hitherto rather separate fields of road safety and sustainable urban mobility. They absolutely go together like ham and eggs, and particularly in relation to vulnerable road users. And I think we've all talked about different aspects of that today. Indeed, for me, I'd like to redefine sustainability to include safety. I don't think you can have a sustainable system which is not also a safe system. And therefore, you know, when we talk about things like electric vehicles in the future, they have got to be as safe as houses. We cannot accept the continuing problems. I'd like to come back to in closing to what Tina just said. So Mrs. Wagner just said about how unacceptable it will be if we don't, with our new automated systems, respect safe limits and so on. I go further than that. There is absolutely no way in hell that new automated cars will be allowed to exceed the speed limits. And that may be the path to solution. Imagine the situation, a fully equipped Mercedes level 5 car with probably a very rich businessman, it probably will be a businessman, lying back in his car as it trundles along at 30 kilometers an hour. And it's overtaken by a smoking VW bus with Save the Whale signs, smoke coming out of every corner of it at 70 kilometers an hour. And the businessman says, well, what the hell? How come I'm respecting the speed limits and he's not? I think you will see a generalized move towards more pressure on speed the more automated systems come into our advanced cars. Technology will drive these things in the future. I'm very optimistic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much for all of the participants. And I think Senator Tjax just wrote us that also he would like to draw a little conclusion from the Hamburg side. So Senator Tjax, what's your main takeaway? What's your conclusion on this discussion today?
Well, the main takeaway is that that we need to put a lot of things into practice, and we have a great and ambitious agenda, and that we are very happy that the European level is in form of the Commission, and also the Parliament is supporting this ambition. And let's say the decarbonization of traffic was always the official agenda in Germany, but was not always taken into action and into place, so to speak. And since we have the agenda and we also want to put it into place, this is very encouraging to go in this direction. And all in all, I can always say we as a city cannot solve the problems alone, and probably the European level thinks this about itself as well. So we need each other, and we need each other to move in the same direction. Otherwise, we have a blockade, and that's what we don't want to have. We want to have mobility. We want people to enjoy mobility. We want people to move to different places, to go on journeys, and to their ones they love. And we want to do it in a decarbonized and good way. And in this area, I think we can make, as a big city in the fourth largest industry economy of the world, I think we can set an example for the digitalization in October. We're trying to host the ITS World Congress and make it a success, also a success for Europe. And well, we hope we are in the hope of support of this agenda, and for all other European cities, because this is not a competition. This is of learning from each other, about each other, and of good ways. And some answers are quite simple, like taking the space from the cars and give them to other users. But it is a matter of political decision and political leadership also to do it. And we are on our way, and yeah, let's do it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Tjax, for this conclusion. And thank you very much again for all the participants here. I think it was a great discussion. I learned a lot, and I am sure that we are all looking forward to meet again to present our results on these issues in October at the ITS World Congress. And also many thanks to our audience today. You had very good questions. It was great to have you. And yeah, have a good day. Thanks.